Hi guys, Laura here. Just hope you all are doing well. We haven't sent a video out to you guys for a long time, and I hope that as the year has been going, as school has been starting, that you all are well, that your families are well. We love you guys. We're thinking about you. Um, I had in the process of the year, I've definitely been doing a lot of thinking, and God's been definitely addressing things in my heart and life during this COVID year. And I wanted to share with you one of those things that God has done in my heart, which I'm actually really excited about. If there was a topic for this video, I would call it my 20-year grudge. Kind of crazy, but yeah, I've held a 20-year-old grudge. Um, which is a long time to hold one. We hear about grudge, like if you've heard the horror film called The Grudge, um, that's what we may compare it to. But the definition of a grudge is to hold a deep-seated resentment. And even as a Christian, um, that was it's one of the things I've held on to. And this year, I've learned to let it go. And so I wanted to tell you about what that was. Many of you guys have heard about my issues with my mom in high school. I don't talk too much, and probably the reason why is because I hadn't dealt with it, but I never really mentioned much about my issues with my aunt. Um, Sorry, I have a lot of notes, so bear with me. In the most simplest of terms, without going into too much of detail, um, I grew up kind of feeling like I wasn't good enough for her. She had a lot of her own expectations of what a girl should be, a lot of expectations about how to do things, and so she was very vocal about what those expectations should be, and I just didn't measure up as a girl. There were also times when I felt like I was left out from activities that she had with my cousins. Not all the time, but there were some activities that I just was very well aware that I kind of was left out. I felt left, or at least I felt left out. Um, Growing up, I felt really unloved by her, and honestly, I felt very judged by her. Um, so resentment grew as I entered into adulthood. So my aunt, she married my uncle when I was about 9. So when I say this is a 20-year grudge, like this just got resolved this year. Um, and that is one heck of a long time to hold on to a grudge. Um, and the resentment, so I was hurt as a girl growing up, and then the resentment parts set in as an adulthood. Because finally she started showing some encouragement, like, you're a godly woman, you're showing wisdom beyond your years. I was growing in my faith, and she was affirming all that. And why I was resentful is because as much I was presently getting the affirmation that I always wanted, part of me was like, well, why didn't you give this earlier as a kid? Where was it when I was a child and needed that affirmation? As a Christian, I knew, and I've always known that you need to forgive. But knowing something in your head and practicing it is obviously a lot. It can be harder to practice what we learn in the Bible. Um, and for me, I was hurt, and not only was I hurt, but I also knew well aware that she had hurt some other family members in my family. Um, and so part of me was very protective, very hurt, and I was convinced myself that being so I was carrying that, and part of me was just convinced that, oh yeah, I was forgiving her because I was willing to be around family activities where she was around. I was willing to eat meals with her, talk with her, in small chit chat settings. And yet, how do I say this? You can do things and still carry bitterness in your heart. You can say, well, I'm forgiving because I'm willing to go to a family activity, but if your heart is still bitter and you're carrying even hatred, you still haven't forgiven. And the reality is that was true for me, that I hadn't really forgiven my aunt of the things that I felt like she had done to me. She was still prone to saying some kind of ignorant things, and then she's very vocal about what she believes and really kind of stands strongly in what she believes. So not only did she say ignorant things, she also said she said it in a very arrogant tone. So here's the thing, she hurt me as a kid, but she would also, some of the things she said continued to hurt me as I was getting to be an adult. So it just felt like an ongoing wound. Which those are the hardest to forgive, honestly, when there is an ongoing wound or a repeated wound. And I don't know if you've had something like that happen, but it sucks. It sucks immensely to have someone continually hurt you. I once I finally had admitted to my dad that I was dealing with this unforgiveness issue, or like I keep getting hurt by auntie, and he once told me that if you have to wait till someone says sorry before you actually forgive them, then it's not true forgiveness. And the truth is I justified my resentment toward my aunt, because she wasn't making it right, and I have such a like just sense of justice that if something's wrong, it has to be made right. And if somebody's not making it right, then I get angry because it's not being resolved. And so I would justify the fact that I was becoming bitter. I probably wouldn't have, I wouldn't have admitted that I was bitter, but I was. I was starting to get to that point. I wasn't the mean grouch, hate life kind of bitter, but I I can tell you that if I didn't resolve it, maybe 20 years from now I would have been that kind of woman. Um so this year God really dealt with me on this issue. Yeah, I was willing to be physically around my aunt, but I still wasn't forgiving her. Um I had just started the process, which is admitting that I need to forgive her and saying, God, I'm dealing with this. This is a hurt. That's one step about forgiveness, is it's okay to admit that it hurt you. But that's just the start. Um, During the summertime, there was a topic on my mind, that I felt like there was a lot of people around me, excuse me. Um, I just didn't feel like a lot of them could understand my position in this certain situation. And then on a walk, I realized my aunt did. The same aunt who had hurt me the last 20 years, right? She understood what it was like to be in my position on this certain subject. And the Holy Spirit prompted me to talk to her, that I should ask her advice on this topic. Could you imagine being hurt by somebody and then you're going through life and you need advice on a topic, and God tells you the very person that you need advice from is the person who has hurt you? Yeah, kind of awkward. Um, Definitely was kind of like, what? Can we get around that? Um, I didn't want to do it initially, and yet I did it anyway. I met with her for lunch one day this summer, um, and we had a great conversation. Just talked about life. We first off, we did talk about the topic that was on my mind, but we also um, uh, talked about other things. And then recently we had a phone call. Excuse me. Um, Recently we had a phone call and we had another great conversation. And in the last couple months, like this is legitimately just in the last couple months, I've realized that my aunt may still have her views. She may still have her expectations, which it is what it is. But she's human. And she still loves Jesus. And we can still be a family and we can still have great conversations and support one another. I learned in this process that my aunt has, honestly, she's cared about me. Though sometimes maybe her methods weren't always perfect. And actually paid attention to things about me as she when I was a child, she paid attention to things that my own mother didn't catch on. Which is crazy to think that she recognized things as a child that my own mom didn't. And yet all this time I thought she didn't care about me and that she didn't love me. And I would have missed out on this realization if I wasn't obedient to God and if I had decided to hold on to that resentment, I wouldn't have realized that my aunt really does care about me. Even though she's imperfect. Like we all are, actually. So, forgiveness is powerful. It is so powerful. I'm going to give you a synopsis of the scripture rather than reading it in its entirety. It's from Matthew 18:21 to 35. So, the short retelling of it is that Peter decided to be a knockoff and ask, "Hey, God, Jesus, if I forgive my brother 7 times, I'm doing pretty good, right?" And then Jesus says the famous, "No, 70 times 7, which is 490 times." Which, if you're really good at counting, good for you, but most people would lose count, especially in a day. And really what Jesus was saying was that learn to forget how to count how many times you have to forgive somebody. Jesus then proceeded to tell a parable about 2 servants who both owed a debt and how one was forgiven of a debt and then forgot to forgive another, his own coworker, basically. Jesus also made the point that we all have sinned and need forgiveness. So withholding forgiveness doesn't just help us stay angry, but it actually makes us hypocritical as Christians and closes our hearts from being forgiven by God Himself. There is a very dire consequence that if we are not forgiving others, then God Himself won't forgive us. And the main reason is because forgiveness is the very heart of God. And so we as Christians, when we have been forgiven and we refuse to forgive, we are refusing to carry on the heart of God. But like I said, forgiveness is a lot easier said and easy to talk about than in its practicality forms. We've all been hurt by somebody in some way. Sometimes it feels like other people have been hurt worse than other people. But nonetheless, sorry, I'm moving my notebook. Nonetheless, we have been hurt, and as Christians, we are told to forgive. It's easy to hold on to our heart and easy to hold on to our hurt, though, because we understand there's a sense that we have been wronged and it needs to be righted. If you're anything like me, um, we if you're anything like me, you're not okay unless it's been made okay. In our movies, especially dramatic movies, when there is a certain crime made, the movie doesn't end unless, or at least it shouldn't end, in my opinion, unless there has been a sense of justice. And a lot of the times, the reason why we hold on to unforgiveness is because we are waiting for justice to happen. And yet, God tells us to let go. And let go of the debt that the person who offended us did to us. This isn't to say okay to what had happened. In fact, I have learned now that when somebody says sorry to me, I don't say, oh, it's okay, because then that can give permission for it to be happening again. But rather, I say, I forgive you. And what forgiveness means is that we're letting go, and this is really crucial, we're letting go to the idea that they better fess up in our timing and in our way. So holding on to unforgiveness to my aunt was like she had to owe up to the fact that she hurt me. She had to owe up to the fact that she said certain things that were not right. And yet, here's the fact, she's never has. She still holds some of those views. And yet, I have had to learn to trust that God is going to bring the justice. And that can be hard because we want things done right now, especially in this 21st century. Everything has to be immediate. And yet, frankly, the truth is we have all sinned. And this is where it gets into that deeper part. And we all have owed a debt to God, first and foremost, but also we've if you have been hurt by somebody, I'm sure that you've hurt somebody else too. And in going back to the whole debt to God, the amazing thing, but it was also the most unfair thing, is that God put his son to death in our place. We should have paid that debt, and yet Jesus did. So we forgive because he has forgiven us. We forgive because no human debt can compare to what anyone did to God. And lastly, we forgive because God showed that his heart is toward reconciliation, and as children of God, we follow in obedience. So there's that word reconciliation. So what does it mean? It means to reestablish a friendship, to resolve or settle, and to bring oneself to accept the situation. So what does reconciliation not look like? It doesn't mean that you say it was okay what they did. It doesn't mean that we're not allowing ourselves to talk about it. To heal from a hurt, you got to talk about it. There have been times I've been convinced that, oh, if I just don't bring it up, then I'm being forgiven. But I got to talk about it at some level. Maybe it's with God, and he can just say, okay, well, it was just a minor thing, let it go. Oh, okay. But you gotta admit the hurt. And lastly, reconciliation does not mean proving your own side. We're gonna get to that in a bit. What is reconciliation, though? Reconciliation means, it may mean talking with the person about what they did. If you have enough security or safety in that relationship, you might be able to say, hey, I've held unforgiveness against you, Um, and this is why. Um, so you might have the opportunity to share with what they did. But the primary thing is that you have to change your attitude toward the person who hurt you. And this goes back to that proving your point, because if you are trying to say, hey, I held on to unforgiveness, and yet you want to go into a ranting mode, trust me, you're not forgiving. You're just trying to prove that you're right. You're trying to prove your justice. If you can't approach somebody who offended you without wanting to prove your own side, then your attitude does need to be checked. Reconciliation means reestablishing the friendship or the relationship. So whatever is best to bring healing into that relationship, those are the steps you want to take. And this could go into a lot further detail in a discussion. So if you want to message one of us at Four Winds or True Life, we definitely can talk to you guys on a more specific situation that you guys have dealt with. But the premise of reconciliation is that we learn to trust that God brings justice to the situation. Now, here's the kicker. Be aware that that may look like, well, He transforms our heart is what happens in forgiveness and reconciliation. First and foremost, He's going to deal with the offended heart. I've had to learn to love my aunt, whether or not I agree with her on her views. I've had to learn to see the value in her and the value in her wisdom, even though there are some parts of what she says about different topics that there are some blind sides and she is ignorant. What is amazing about my story of forgiveness is that I could tell you, I had so many thoughts in my head about how, oh, I wish I could just rail on her about what she says and what she's done that hurt me. And yet none of that has ever happened. Never. In this entire process of forgiveness, God dealt with my own heart. And when He dealt with my own heart, I learned to see my aunt differently. Forgiveness in my story is that God showed me that He's dealt with the justice. Part of the issues that I held on to against my aunt was my own insecurities. And part of letting go is realizing that the justice that God has brought to me is realizing to see myself how He sees me and not to be defined by other things that aren't really, not to be defined by things that are just mere opinions, but to be defined by what He says about me. And when I stand on what He says about me, I don't have to take it personally about what other people may say or what they think should be in a box. But even more so, what is amazing is to have that relationship with my aunt. Like, for Thanksgiving, I'm going to call her up. I'm going to chat it up. What the heck? Yeah. I can't believe that, like, I can have that relationship with her now. And it's because I've learned to take that grudge that I've held on for 20 years and burn it up. I'm not even going to bury it, because burying it means you can dig it right back up. I'm going to burn it up to ashes. Sounds good. Anyway, I just wanted to share with you guys that story and just that amazing, crazy, amazing, forgiveness story, and what God's been doing in my heart, one of the things that God's been doing in my heart this year. and I hope that encourages you guys. Thanksgiving is coming up. I hope that you all have an amazing Thanksgiving. We love you guys. Talk to you later.